The impossible encounter. The bridge of the Thanari flagship buzzed with activity. Admiral Karath stood tall, his dark crimson uniform shimmering under the soft glow of the control panels. His 4 eyes, each capable of tracking separate screens, were focused on the holographic display in the center of the room. A fleet of unknown ships was approaching Thanari space, and they moved at speeds that defied reason. "What are we looking at?" Karath asked, his voice sharp but controlled. He was known for his calm demeanor, even in the most tense situations. The sensor officer, a young Thanari with a nervous twitch in his tail, hesitated before answering. "Admiral, these ships, they're unlike anything we've encountered before. Their speed exceeds known technological limits. They're impossible." Karath's jaw tightened. He didn't believe in impossible. The Thanari Empire had ruled the galaxy for over 1,000 years, crushing any species that dared challenge their dominance. Yet here was something new, something unexpected. "Impossible or not, they are trespassing in our space," Karath said, his voice firm. "Send out a warning. They have 5 minutes to turn back." The communications officer nodded and transmitted the message. A few tense moments passed as everyone on the bridge waited for a response. None came. The unknown ships continued their rapid approach, closing the distance between them and the Thanari fleet. "Admiral," the tactical officer spoke up, "these ships are not slowing down. They'll breach our defensive line in less than 2 minutes." Karath frowned. It wasn't just their speed that was unusual. Their formation was chaotic, almost reckless, yet it seemed deliberate. No experienced fleet commander would arrange ships in such a disorganized manner, unless they knew something that Thanari didn't. "Activate the perimeter defenses," Karath ordered. "Prepare the fleet to intercept." The Thanari fleet, a vast array of sleek, silver ships armed with the most advanced weapons in the galaxy, moved into position. Karath was confident. No enemy had ever broken through the Thanari defenses, and he didn't expect these newcomers to be any different. As the alien ships came into view, the bridge fell silent. The ships were small compared to the massive Thanari cruisers, but their design was unlike anything anyone had seen before. Their black angular hulls reflected no light, making them appear like shadows in the void of space. "They don't look like much," the tactical officer muttered. "Underestimate them at your peril," Karath replied. Suddenly, a communication came through. It wasn't in Thanari, but the ship's translation systems quickly decoded it. A calm, human voice echoed across the bridge. "This is Captain Evelyn Cross of the human fleet. You are in violation of our territorial boundaries. Withdraw now, or face the consequences." Karath raised an eyebrow. "Humans?" he repeated. The word tasted unfamiliar. Humans were a minor species, barely out of their home system. How could they have built ships like these? "Open a channel," he commanded. The communication officer complied, and Karath addressed the unknown fleet. "This is Admiral Karath of the Thanari Empire. You are trespassing in our space. Surrender immediately, or you will be destroyed." The human captain's response was immediate. "We will not surrender, Admiral. Turn your fleet around while you still can. This is your only warning." The audacity of her words stunned the bridge crew. Karath, however, remained calm. "They're bluffing," he said. "All ships, fire at will." The Thanari fleet unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, filling the void with streaks of glowing plasma. But as the first shots reached the human ships, something incredible happened. The human ships moved, not like any ship Karath had ever seen. They didn't simply dodge. They seemed to phase in and out of existence, vanishing and reappearing in entirely different locations. The Thanari weapons passed harmlessly through empty space. "How is that possible?" the tactical officer exclaimed, panic creeping into his voice. Karath clenched his fists. "Focus the fire. Target their engines. They can't keep this up forever." But the human ships weren't just dodging. They were retaliating. Small, focused bursts of energy struck the Xenari fleet with pinpoint accuracy. One by one, Xenari ships exploded, their mighty hulls no match for the human weapons. "Admiral, we've lost the Vorith and the Qatar," a crew member shouted. Karath's mind raced. This wasn't a battle, it was a demonstration. The humans weren't just trying to win. They were sending a message. "Order the fleet to retreat," Karath commanded. The crew stared at him in disbelief. "Retreat, sir?" the tactical officer asked. "Yes," Karath snapped. "Do it now." As the Xenari ships turned to flee, the human fleet held their position. They didn't pursue, but their presence was a silent threat. On the bridge of his flagship, Karath stared at the holographic display, his mind filled with questions. How had humanity achieved this level of technology? And what other surprises did they have in store? For the first time in his career, Admiral Karath felt a chill of fear. This wasn't just a battle, it was the beginning of something far greater. The humans were no ordinary enemy, and Karath knew he would never forget the name Evelyn Cross. The first clash. Admiral Karath paced the bridge of his flagship, the Xenari Triumph, his tail swishing in measured, deliberate motions. The holographic display still showed the human fleet hovering at the edge of Xenari's face, unmoving and undisturbed. It was as if they were daring him to strike again. For the first time in decades, Karath felt unsure of his next move. "Status report," he demanded, breaking the tense silence. The sensor officer adjusted his controls nervously. "The human fleet has not advanced, sir. Their ships are holding position, but their energy signatures remain erratic. It's almost as if..." "They're not ships," the tactical officer interrupted, his voice filled with frustration. "They're ghosts. They move like shadows, defy targeting systems, and fire weapons that punch through our shields like paper. What are we even dealing with?" Karath silenced him with a glare. "We are dealing with an enemy that believes they can defy the Xenari Empire, and I intend to show them how mistaken they are." He turned to his communication officer. "Send a broadcast to all nearby fleets. I want reinforcements here within the hour. Prepare for a second engagement." The officer hesitated. "Admiral, if I may, should we not?" Karath's eyes narrowed. "Speak plainly. Should we not attempt diplomacy, sir? These humans have already proven themselves to be unconventional. Perhaps there is more to gain by." "Diplomacy is for the weak," Karath snapped. "We are the Xenari. We conquer, we dominate, and we rule. These humans are an anomaly, nothing more. And anomalies are to be crushed, not negotiated with." Before the officer could respond, a chime echoed through the bridge. The humans were sending another transmission. "Patch it through," Karath ordered. The calm, confident voice of Captain Evelyn Cross filled the room. "Admiral Karath, I assume you've had time to reconsider your position. I'll remind you again, this is your final chance to leave peacefully." Karath couldn't help but sneer. "You may have surprised us once, Captain Cross, but you underestimate the might of the Xenari Empire. We do not run from primitives." There was a pause, and then Evelyn's voice returned, colder than before. "Primitives. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Admiral. But since you insist on testing us, we'll oblige." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in a heavy silence. Karath felt his chest tighten. Something about her tone was different this time. Less of a warning and more of a promise. "Admiral," the sensor officer shouted suddenly. "The human fleet is moving. They're advancing. Fast." Karath turned to the tactical officer. "All ships, hold formation. Let them come to us. We'll meet them head-on." The Xenari fleet reassembled into a defensive arc, their ships bristling with weapons primed to fire. Karath watched as the human fleet closed the gap, their strange black hulls cutting through space like predators stalking prey. "Prepare to fire on my mark," Karath commanded, his voice steady. "Let's see how well they handle overwhelming firepower." The human ships drew closer, and just as they entered range, Karath gave the order. "Fire." The Exenary fleet unleashed a torrent of plasma bolts and energy beams, lighting up the void with deadly precision. But once again, the humans defied expectation. Their ships didn't just dodge. They seemed to bend reality itself, disappearing and reappearing in impossible positions. One moment, a ship would be in the crosshairs. The next, it would be behind the Exenary lines, firing devastating blasts into their exposed flanks. "Admiral, they're breaching our formation." The tactical officer yelled, panic creeping into his voice. "We can't lock onto them." Karath slammed his fist onto the console. "Regroup. Focus fire on the lead ship. Force them into retreat." But Evelyn Cross had no intention of retreating. Her fleet moved with surgical precision, dismantling the Exenary ships one by one. Unlike the Exenary, who relied on overwhelming numbers and brute force, the humans fought with adaptability and creativity. Every maneuver seemed designed to exploit the Exenary's weaknesses. Within minutes, the battle turned into chaos. The mighty Exenary fleet, the pride of the Empire, was being outmatched by a far smaller, less experienced enemy. Karath's command ship shuddered violently as an explosion rocked its port side. "Damage report," he barked. "Shields at 40%, the engineering officer replied. "Hull integrity compromised on multiple decks." Karath gritted his teeth. How was this happening? How could these humans, a species barely known to the galaxy, be overpowering the Exenary? On the human flagship, Captain Cross watched the chaos unfold on her own holographic display. Her crew worked with quiet efficiency, executing her orders without hesitation. She leaned back in her chair, her expression calm but focused. "They're predictable," she muttered to herself. "Big, slow, and full of pride, just like we expected." "Captain," her first officer said, "the Exenary fleet is collapsing. Should we press the attack?" Evelyn considered it for a moment before shaking her head. "No. Let them retreat. They need to understand what they're up against." Back on the Exenary Triumph, Karath realized the battle was lost. His fleet was in disarray, and every second they remained in the fight only brought more destruction. "Order the retreat," he said quietly, his voice filled with a bitterness he hadn't felt in years. The bridge crew hesitated, stunned by the command. "Admiral." "Do it," Karath barked, his tone leaving no room for argument. As the Exenary ships turned and fled, the human fleet held their position, watching silently. It wasn't a victory march, it was a warning. Karath stared at the display, his pride in ruins. This wasn't just a defeat, it was a revelation. The humans weren't merely a threat, they were something entirely new. And Karath had no idea how to stop them. The hidden weapon. The dimly lit War Council chamber aboard the Exenary Triumph was heavy with tension. Admiral Karath sat at the head of the circular table, his 4 eyes scanning the holographic reports projected before him. Fragments of his once mighty fleet drifted in space, recorded by long-range scanners. The defeat was fresh, the humiliation raw. Around him, his senior officers debated in hushed, nervous tones. It was uncharacteristic for the Exenary, a species known for their confidence in war. But no one dared speak directly to Karath. Not yet. His temper was legendary, and his silence was more dangerous than any outburst. Finally, Karath broke the stillness. "What do we know about these humans?" The intelligence officer, Commander Varric, straightened in his seat. "Admiral, humans are a minor species, confined to a small region of space near the galactic fringe. Until recently, they were considered insignificant, a species still mastering interstellar travel. Their sudden appearance with advanced technology is unexplained." Karath's claws tapped against the table. "Unexplained. I don't accept that. Technology like theirs doesn't appear out of thin air. Someone has given them an advantage. A weapon, perhaps, or an ally. Vyrek hesitated. Admiral, our scientists have analyzed the energy signatures from their ships. The data is troubling. Karath's gaze locked onto him. Explain. Vyrek tapped the table, and a new projection appeared. It showed a wave-like pattern, glowing faintly blue. This is the energy signature emitted by their engines during the battle. At first, it seemed like a variation of hyperspace technology, but it doesn't conform to known physics. Their ships don't just move faster than ours. They bypass space itself. The room fell silent. One officer leaned forward, his voice incredulous. Bypass space. What does that even mean? Vyrek exhaled slowly. It means their ships don't travel through space. They manipulate it. The humans have found a way to fold space-time itself, allowing them to appear and disappear almost instantly. This isn't just advanced technology. It's decades, maybe centuries, ahead of anything we've seen. Karath stood abruptly, towering over the table. Centuries. You're telling me a species we dismissed as primitives has surpassed us by centuries? Vyrek nodded, his expression grim. Yes, Admiral. And there's more. The energy signature is stable, controlled. Whatever they're using, they've perfected it. Karath's mind raced. Perfected space manipulation. How? It didn't make sense. The Xenari were the apex of technological development in the galaxy. For centuries, they had crushed or absorbed any species that dared to challenge them. And yet, these humans had done the unthinkable. The tactical officer, Commander Threx, spoke up. Admiral, we need to strike now, before they can regroup. A coordinated assault with reinforcements. No, Karath interrupted sharply. We don't understand their capabilities. Charging into another battle blind would be suicide. Threx bristled but remained silent. Karath turned back to Vyrek. Do we have any idea how they developed this technology? Could they have allied with another power? Vyrek hesitated again. There's no evidence of external influence. Admiral, our spies on their outer colonies report no significant trade with advanced species. This technology appears to be their own. Karath's claws tightened into a fist. Impossible. No species evolves that quickly without help. Before anyone could respond, the chamber's intercom buzzed. The voice of the communication officer filled the room. Admiral, we've received another transmission from the human fleet. Karath's eyes narrowed. Patch it through. The room dimmed as the holographic projector shifted to display Captain Evelyn Cross. She stood in her command center, her posture relaxed but authoritative. Her calm demeanor irritated Karath more than her words ever could. Admiral Karath, she began, her voice carrying an unshakable confidence. I trust you've had time to reflect on our last encounter. Karath's voice was a low growl. Captain Cross, you've made a grave mistake by challenging the Xenari Empire. I will uncover your secrets, and when I do, your people will beg for mercy. Evelyn smiled faintly, as if amused. You're welcome to try, Admiral. But I'll save you the trouble. Our secrets aren't something you can steal or replicate. What you saw in the last battle is only the beginning. Karath's jaw clenched. Are you so arrogant to believe your kind can stand against the might of the Xenari? Her expression hardened. Arrogance isn't standing up to a bully. Admiral, it's assuming no one ever will. We didn't come here to start a war, but if you force us, you'll see what humanity is truly capable of. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the room in a tense silence. Karath's officers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to make of the human captain's words. She's bluffing, Threx said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. They're trying to intimidate us. No, Karath said quietly, his tone icy. She's daring us. The Admiral turned to Vyrek. I want every scrap of information on these humans. Their ships, their colonies, their history, everything. There's more to this than meets the eye, and I will find it. Vyrek nodded, already compiling reports. Karath's gaze drifted to the holographic display of the human fleet. They were an enigma, a dangerous one. But Karath was no stranger to danger. He had faced the unknown before and emerged victorious. Yet, in the quiet of his own thoughts, a sliver of doubt crept in. The humans weren't just another opponent. They were something far more dangerous, an enemy with nothing to lose and everything to prove. The trap. Admiral Karath stood at the observation deck of his flagship, the void of space stretching endlessly before him. The faint glow of distant stars was a stark contrast to the dark thoughts swirling in his mind. The humans had proven themselves a formidable enemy, but Karath was not one to accept defeat. His pride and tactical brilliance demanded retaliation. This time, there would be no room for failure. "Status report," he ordered, his voice cutting through the silence. Commander Threx stepped forward, his tail flicking with nervous energy. "The human fleet remains in position near the Nerith asteroid belt, Admiral. They're stationary, as if waiting." Karath allowed himself a small smile. "They're overconfident. Good. Let them believe they hold the advantage." The asteroid belt was a treacherous region of space, filled with massive rocks and unpredictable debris fields. For centuries, it had been a graveyard for careless travelers. Karath had spent weeks studying its patterns, memorizing its dangers. He saw it not as a hazard, but as an opportunity. "They'll regret coming here," Karath muttered. He turned to his officers, his tone sharp and commanding. "Deploy the fleet in a pincer formation. Hide the forward cruisers behind the largest asteroids. When the humans advance, we'll collapse on them from all sides." Threx hesitated. "Admiral, they're ships. They move unpredictably. What if they—" Karath silenced him with a glare. "I've accounted for that. Their speed and maneuverability mean nothing in the confined spaces of the asteroid belt. They won't have room to evade. Here, brute force will prevail." Threx nodded reluctantly and relayed the orders. The Xenari fleet moved into position, their sleek silver ships blending seamlessly with the shadows of the asteroid field. Karath watched as the trap was set, his confidence growing with each passing moment. On the bridge of the human flagship, Captain Evelyn Cross studied the holographic map with calm precision. The Xenari fleet was nowhere in sight, but she wasn't fooled. "They're hiding," she said, her voice steady. "This is a classic Xenari tactic. They think the asteroid belt gives them the advantage." Her first officer, Lieutenant Mark Davis, frowned. "It's a good strategy. Even with our mobility, navigating this field under fire won't be easy." Evelyn smiled faintly. "That's why we won't be navigating it." Mark raised an eyebrow. "You have a plan, Captain." "Always," Evelyn replied. She turned to the helm. "Activate the phase drive. Let's remind them who they're dealing with." The crew moved swiftly, and within moments, the human ships shimmered as their phase drives powered up. The fleet began to vanish, phasing out of visible space. Karath watched the holographic display on his bridge, his confidence giving way to unease. The human fleet was moving, but not in a way that made sense. Their ships flickered, disappearing from one position and reappearing in another. "Report," he barked. Virik, his intelligence officer, stared at his console, his expression grim. "Admiral, they're using the same spatial manipulation technology as before. Our sensors can't track them accurately." Karath's claws dug into the armrests of his chair. "Maintain formation. They can't phase forever." But the humans didn't need forever. They emerged from the shadows, striking from angles the Xenari couldn't anticipate. One by one, the hidden cruisers in Karath's trap were destroyed before they could even return fire. "Admiral, we've lost the Kynar and the Valor," a tactical officer shouted. Karath's jaw tightened. He refused to accept what was unfolding. "Focus all fire on their lead ship. Bring it down, no matter the cost." The Xenari fleet regrouped, unleashing a torrent of plasma bolts and energy blasts. But the humans danced through the chaos, their movements fluid and unpredictable. Karath watched in growing frustration as his fleet was picked apart. Then the HFY Triumph shuddered violently as an explosion rocked its hull. "Direct hit on our aft shields," the engineering officer yelled. "We've lost auxiliary power." Karath's vision narrowed. His trap had become his nightmare. On the human flagship, Evelyn watched the HFY fleet crumble. Her face remained calm, but there was a spark of satisfaction in her eyes. "Admiral Karath's arrogance was his undoing," she said quietly. "He thought he could outmaneuver us in his own playground." Mark smirked. "Seems he underestimated us." Again, Evelyn's gaze hardened. "He'll learn. But not today. Send the signal. Pull back the fleet." Mark blinked in surprise. "We're letting them go." "They need to understand," Evelyn replied. "We don't seek war, but we won't be underestimated. Let them carry their fear back to the Empire." As the human ships phased out of sight, the silence on the HFY Triumph was deafening. Karath sat in his chair, his claws still gripping the armrests. His once mighty fleet was in shambles, and his carefully laid trap had been turned against him. "Admiral," Vyrek said hesitantly, "they've retreated." Karath didn't respond immediately. His mind was racing, searching for answers. The humans hadn't pursued. They could have wiped out his entire fleet, yet they chose to leave. "This isn't mercy," he said finally, his voice low but filled with resolve. "This is a message. They're toying with us." He stood, his towering figure casting a long shadow over the bridge. "We'll regroup, rebuild, and return. They may think they've won, but this is far from over." But deep inside, Karath couldn't shake the feeling that the humans had planned everything. The thought sent a chill down his spine. They weren't just an enemy, they were the unknown. And the unknown was far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The alliance breaks. The council chamber aboard the HFY Triumph was more crowded than usual, the tension among the gathered commanders thick enough to cut with a blade. Admiral Karath stood at the head of the room, his eyes scanning the faces of his allies, each of whom bore a mix of unease and defiance. The human fleet had left them in shambles, and whispers of dissent had begun to ripple through the ranks. "We cannot ignore this any longer, Karath," growled Lord Vernos, leader of the HFY's most powerful allied faction. His green-tinted scales shimmered in the low light. "These humans are not just another rebellious species. They've humiliated us twice now. Twice. And yet you insist on chasing them." Karath's tail flicked sharply, a sign of his growing irritation. "Careful, Vernos. Are you suggesting we abandon the fight and let them challenge the Empire's dominance?" Vernos slammed his clawed hand on the table, his voice rising. "What I'm suggesting is that your pride is leading us to ruin. The humans don't play by our rules. They use technology that defies reason, tactics that defy logic. And still, you cling to the belief that brute force will solve this." The other commanders murmured in agreement, their voices low but filled with doubt. For the first time, Karath felt the weight of dissent pressing against him. His allies, who had once revered him as a tactical genius, now questioned his leadership. He leaned forward, his voice cold and commanding. "Do not mistake caution for defeat, Vernos. The humans may be clever, but they are not invincible. They're using a weapon, a trick, something we've yet to uncover. Once we do, their advantage will crumble." Before Vernos could retort, Commander Vyrek entered the chamber, his expression grim. "Admiral, I have the intelligence report you requested." Karath motioned for him to proceed, glad for the interruption. Vyrek placed a holographic projector on the table, and the room dimmed as a detailed map of human-controlled space appeared. "The humans have expanded rapidly," Vyrek began, his voice steady despite the tension. "Their colonies are small but well defended. However, we've detected a significant energy source emanating from one of their core systems, something that matches the signature of their phase drive technology." The murmurs grew louder. Vernos tilted his head, his curiosity piqued. And what exactly does that mean? Vyrek hesitated, then continued. It's possible this energy source is their key. It could be the origin of their technology, or at least the facility where it's developed. Karath's eyes narrowed. A weakness. Vyrek nodded. Potentially. If we destroy this facility, it could cripple their ability to produce more ships, or even disable the ones they already have. Vernos folded his arms, his tone skeptical. And how do you propose we reach this so-called weakness? Their fleet won't sit idle while we march into their core systems. Karath's lips curled into a smirk. We don't march. We lure. The humans have been cautious, striking only when provoked. We give them a reason to come to us. And when they do, we'll turn their confidence into their undoing. Meanwhile, on the human flagship, Captain Evelyn Cross stood in the command center, her arms crossed as she watched a holographic projection of the Teneri fleet's movements. They're retreating, her first officer, Mark Davis, noted, pulling back to their core sectors. Evelyn's expression remained neutral, but her sharp eyes betrayed her suspicion. Not retreating. Consolidating. Mark raised an eyebrow. Consolidating for what? Another attack. Possibly, Evelyn replied, but it's more than that. Karath is proud, but he's not a fool. He knows he can't beat us in open combat. He'll be planning something more subtle. A trap. Mark frowned. Then why not press the advantage? We could wipe out what's left of his fleet before he has a chance to regroup. Evelyn shook her head. That's exactly what he wants us to do. If we chase him, we play into his hands. No, we'll stay where we are and make him come to us. Mark smirked. So we're trapping the trapper. Exactly, Evelyn said, her voice firm. But we need more than tactics to win this. Prepare the fleet, and double-check the defenses on the phase core facility. If I were Karath, that's where I'd strike. Back in the Teneri Council chamber, Karath finalized his plans, ignoring the unease that lingered among his allies. We'll bait them into a false victory. A decoy fleet will draw their attention, while a strike team infiltrates their core system and destroys this energy source. And if it fails? Vernos asked, his tone sharp. Karath's gaze turned icy. It won't. But even as he spoke, a flicker of doubt gnawed at him. The humans weren't predictable, and every move they made seemed designed to stay one step ahead. Still, he pushed the thought aside. The Teneri didn't submit to fear. He wouldn't allow this alliance to falter under his watch. As the council adjourned, Karath stared at the holographic map, his mind racing. The humans had become more than an enemy. They were a puzzle, one he was determined to solve. But puzzles, he reminded himself, could be broken. The question was, who would break first? The final stand. The Teneri fleet loomed at the edge of the star system, a vast array of warships glittering like a constellation of death. Admiral Karath stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Teneri Triumph, his four eyes fixed on the holographic display before him. At the center of the projection was the human fleet, smaller in number but defiant as ever, guarding the heart of their empire, the phase core facility. This was it, the culmination of weeks of planning, deception, and preparation. The humans had taken the bait, as Karath knew they would. The decoy fleet had drawn them away from their central defenses, and now his strike force was poised to deliver the killing blow. Admiral, Commander Vyrek said, stepping forward, the human fleet is holding position near the phase core. Their formation is tight, defensive. They're expecting us. Karath's lips curled into a predator smile. Of course they are. That's what makes this moment so perfect. They believe they've outmaneuvered us, that they've anticipated our every move. But they have no idea what we're truly capable of. He gestured to the tactical officer. Deploy the auxiliary fleet along the flanks. I want their defenses stretched thin. Once their forces are scattered, we'll drive straight for the facility. No delays, no hesitation. The officer nodded and relayed the commands. Karath's confidence was palpable, radiating through the bridge. He had studied humanity's tactics, their strange ingenuity, and had crafted a strategy to exploit their weaknesses. Today, the humans would learn that even creativity had limits. On the human flagship, Captain Evelyn Cross stood at the center of a storm of activity. The bridge crew moved with precision, their eyes glued to monitors and tactical displays. Evelyn's gaze was fixed on the main projection, showing the advancing Xenari fleet. "They're bringing everything they have," said Lieutenant Mark Davis, his voice tense. "This isn't just an attack. It's a full-scale assault." Evelyn nodded. "Karath knows this is his last chance. If he doesn't win here, he loses everything." Mark frowned. "And if we lose?" Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "We don't." She turned to her communication officer. "Send the signal to the phase core, activate full planetary defenses, and prepare the fleet for countermeasures." The officer hesitated. "Captain, if they breach the phase core, we lose our technological edge. Are you sure we can hold them here?" Evelyn's voice was steady. "We don't need to hold them forever, just long enough." The battle began with a flash of light as the Xenari auxiliary fleet surged forward, their weapons lighting up the void. The human ships responded in kind, their advanced phase drives allowing them to outmaneuver the initial assault. But Karath's plan was already in motion. "Focus fire on their outer wings," Karath commanded. "Force them to divert resources away from the core." The Xenari ships pressed their attack, bombarding the human flanks with relentless fire. The human fleet responded with precision strikes, phasing in and out of position to avoid destruction. But the sheer scale of the Xenari assault began to take its toll. "Admiral, the humans are repositioning," Vyrek reported. "Their formation is shifting to cover their weakened flanks." Karath's smile widened. "Good. They're playing into our hands. Signal the strike force to move in. Target the phase core directly." On the human flagship, Evelyn watched the shifting tide of the battle with a cold, calculating eye. The Xenari were relentless, their strategy designed to force the humans into an impossible position. But Evelyn had anticipated this. "Mark, is the phase core ready?" she asked. Mark nodded. "Yes, but Captain, if we use it now." "It's the only way," Evelyn interrupted. "Karath thinks he's in control, but he doesn't understand the risks he's taking. Let's show him why this facility is the heart of our fleet." She turned to her tactical officer. "Activate the phase disruptor." The officer hesitated, then entered the command. A moment later, the phase core facility emitted a pulse of energy, invisible but powerful, rippling outward like a shockwave. On the Xenari Triumph, alarms blared as the ship's systems faltered. The holographic display flickered, and the lights dimmed. "Report," Karath barked. Vyrek's voice was frantic. "Admiral, the humans have activated a phase disruptor. Our ships are losing stability." Karath's eyes widened as he realized the scope of what was happening. The phase disruptor wasn't just a defensive measure. It was a weapon. The energy pulse destabilized the Xenari ships, disrupting their systems and causing their engines to falter. Ships began to drift aimlessly, their crews scrambling to regain control. "This wasn't part of their defenses," Karath growled. "This is something else entirely." "Admiral, our strike force is compromised," Vyrek said. "They can't reach the phase core." Karath's claws dug into the armrest of his chair. He had underestimated humanity again. Their ingenuity wasn't limited to ship design or tactics. It extended to weapons that defied logic. "Order a full retreat," Karath said, his voice low and bitter. Vyrek hesitated. "But Admiral." "Do it," Karath roared. As the Xenari fleet began to pull back, Evelyn watched in silence. The battle was over, and humanity had held the line. But her expression wasn't one of triumph. "Captain," Mark asked, "we've won. Why don't you look relieved?" Evelyn shook her head. "Because Karath isn't done. He's learning. adapting. This wasn't his last move. It was just his latest. She turned to the crew, her voice firm. Prepare the fleet. He'll be back. And next time, he won't just want to defeat us. He'll want to destroy us. As the human fleet regrouped, Evelyn knew the war with the Xenari wasn't over. But she also knew one thing with certainty. Humanity had proven they could stand against the galaxy's greatest power. And they wouldn't stop fighting until the Xenari Empire finally broke. The Admiral's nightmare. Admiral Karath sat alone in the dimly lit strategy chamber aboard the crippled Xenari Triumph. The once mighty flagship was now a shadow of its former glory, its hull scorched, and its systems barely functioning. Around him, the silence of space was a constant reminder of his failure. The retreat had been a bitter pill to swallow. His fleet was in shambles, and his allies were scattering like dust on the solar winds. The humans hadn't just defeated him. They had humiliated him in front of the entire galaxy. Yet, Karath's mind wasn't consumed by rage. It was consumed by fear. For the first time in his career, Karath didn't know what to do. The humans weren't just another enemy to conquer. They were something entirely different. Their technology, their tactics, their refusal to submit. It all pointed to a terrifying truth. Humanity was evolving faster than any species in recorded history. The chamber doors hissed open, and Commander Varric entered hesitantly. He saluted before speaking. Admiral, our remaining forces have regrouped at the outer colonies. The allied factions are debating whether to continue their support. Karath's tail twitched with irritation. Debating? They would abandon the Empire over a single enemy. Vyrex's hesitation said everything. Admiral, it's not just the humans' victories. It's the fear they inspire. Their technology defies explanation. Their tactics defy logic. Many believe we're facing something we can't defeat. Karath rose to his full height, his towering figure casting a long shadow across the room. Fear is a weapon, Varric, and the humans wield it well. But weapons can be broken. Vyrex's voice was softer now, almost pleading. Admiral, what if they're more than that? What if they'd surpassed us? The phase disruptor alone is evidence that they're thinking in ways we can't predict. Karath turned away, his gaze fixed on the holographic map of the galaxy. Humanity's territory was still small compared to the vast expanse of the Xenari Empire, but their influence was spreading. Every victory emboldened them, and every loss weakened the Empire's grip. We must adapt, Karath said finally. We've underestimated them at every turn. No more. If we can't defeat them with force, we'll defeat them with cunning. Varric hesitated. What do you propose? Karath's claws tapped against the console as he spoke. Humanity's strength lies in their unity and their creativity. But unity can be fractured, and creativity can be stifled. We will infiltrate their systems, disrupt their alliances, and sow chaos among their people. If we cannot beat them in open war, we will dismantle them from within. Varric nodded slowly, but the doubt in his eyes remained. It will take time, Admiral, and there's no guarantee it will succeed. Karath's voice was cold as ice. Failure is not an option. The Xenari Empire does not bow to primitives. On the human flagship, Captain Evelyn Cross stood in her private quarters, staring out at the vast expanse of space. The victory at the phase core had been decisive, but she knew the war was far from over. The Xenari would return. Karath would return. And next time, he wouldn't make the same mistakes. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she said. Lieutenant Mark Davis entered, his expression serious. "Captain, we've received a message from the Galactic Council. They want to negotiate an alliance." Evelyn turned, her brow furrowed. "The Council? They've ignored us for years. Why now?" Mark handed her a datapad. "Because of Karath. Word of the Xenari's defeat has spread, and the Council sees an opportunity. They believe we can stand against the Empire, but they want guarantees." Evelyn read the message, her expression unreadable. The Council's interest was both an opportunity and a risk. Humanity had fought alone for so long, relying on their ingenuity and resilience. An alliance could bring new resources and support, but it could also bring entanglements that might compromise their independence. "We'll proceed cautiously," Evelyn said finally. "The Council will want to use us as much as we use them. But if it helps us stop Karath, it's worth the risk." Mark hesitated before speaking again. "Captain, do you think Karath is done?" Evelyn's gaze hardened. "No. He's licking his wounds, but he's not finished. He'll come back stronger, smarter. We have to be ready." Mark nodded and left the room, leaving Evelyn alone with her thoughts. She turned back to the window, her reflection staring back at her. "We've come too far to lose now," she whispered. "If Karath wants a war, we'll give him one he'll never forget." Far away, in the heart of Xenari space, Karath stood before a council of his most loyal commanders. His voice was calm, but the fire in his eyes burned brighter than ever. "The humans believe they've won," he said, his voice resonating through the chamber. "They think they've broken us, but they've only awakened something far greater." He gestured to a massive display behind him, showing the schematics of a new ship, a vessel larger and more advanced than anything that Xenari had ever built. "This is the Vindicator," Karath announced, "a ship designed not to fight humanity, but to annihilate them. We will strike at their heart, and we will not stop until their very memory is erased from the stars." The room erupted in cheers, but Karath remained silent. In his mind, he replayed every battle, every defeat, every lesson the humans had taught him. This wasn't just a war, it was a reckoning. As the council adjourned, Karath stood alone, staring at the schematics of his new weapon. For the first time, he allowed himself a moment of doubt. "Are you ready, humans?" he murmured to himself. "Because I will be." In the void of space, two unstoppable forces prepared for the next confrontation, each knowing that the stakes had never been higher.